Imagine you're playing a game. You follow the rules, help others, and expect fairness. But then someone breaks those rules, steps over others, cheats and wins, again and again. You tell yourself it's a fluke, but soon you realize a grim pattern. The people who seem to care the least about morality often end up with the most power. Why is that? Are the worst people simply better at winning? Or is something broken in how we define success, virtue, and leadership? Let's peel back the layers of society, psychology, and philosophy to explore a question that's haunted us for centuries. Why do ruthless people often rise to power? And what can those of us with a conscience do about it? At its core, human civilization is built on a paradox. We preach cooperation, but we reward domination. The earliest human tribes needed leaders, people who could make quick decisions, protect the group, and take risks. The ones who hesitated, they didn't last. So evolution favored boldness, cunning, and decisiveness, not necessarily kindness. Fast forward to today and the game has changed, but the instincts haven't. In boardrooms, politics, and even personal relationships, traits like assertiveness, confidence, and strategic ruthlessness are still rewarded, not because they're good, but because they work. And in many cases, those who refuse to play dirty are left behind, not because they're wrong, but because they're unprepared for the reality of the game. Think of power not as a person, but as a force, like fire. It doesn't care if you're good or bad, it only cares if you can wield it. Throughout history, we've watched ambitious leaders rise, not because they were virtuous, but because they understood how to control the levers of influence. They knew when to manipulate perception, when to hide their intentions, when to strike. Niccolò Machiavelli in The Prince wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. This wasn't a prescription for evil, it was a cold observation of how the world operates. Moral systems, by contrast, often focus on ideals, how the world should be. But the pursuit of power, that's grounded in how the world is. This disconnect explains why genuinely good people often struggle in competitive environments. They expect fairness to govern outcomes, but fairness is a value, not a mechanism. Power, unfortunately, doesn't operate on values. It operates on leverage. To understand this dynamic, we need to revisit one of the most provocative insights in Western philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche's division of morality into two types, master morality and slave morality. Master morality originates from strength. It values courage, pride, ambition, and self-determination. It creates its own rules. Slave morality, on the other hand, arises from oppression. It values humility, compassion, patience, and meekness, not because these were always noble, but because they were necessary for survival among the weak. Nietzsche's point wasn't that one morality is better than the other, it was that both serve a function. But when slave morality becomes dominant in a society, something strange happens. Power becomes invisible. It's still there, quietly amassed by those who aren't bound by the dominant moral code. They don't seek approval, they seek results. And those results often put them in charge of companies, countries, and cultures. Now, let's be clear, ruthlessness isn't always about cruelty. It's often about clarity, about being willing to make decisions others are too afraid to make. But there's a cost. Those who play the ruthless game often burn bridges, isolate themselves, and become prisoners of their own ambitions. They rise quickly, yes, but many fall just as fast. Think of historical tyrants, disgraced CEOs, fallen politicians. Power without purpose is a hollow throne, and without inner balance, the strong often self-destruct. Meanwhile, those who lead with conscience suffer another kind of burden, frustration. They watch as cheaters win, as manipulators ascend, and as the world applauds behavior they find ethically repulsive. Their struggle isn't just against others, it's against disillusionment. So where does that leave us? Here's the good news: morality is not weakness, but blind morality is. If you refuse to recognize how power works, If you cling to fairness in a world that rewards force, you don't win virtue. You lose agency. The goal isn't to become ruthless. The goal is to become strategic. You can act with compassion and still understand manipulation. You can seek truth while recognizing deception. You can be kind without being naive. True strength isn't abandoning values, it's integrating them with awareness. It's knowing when to speak and when to listen, when to fight and when to retreat, when to lead and when to let others fall on their own sword. Power without morality becomes tyranny, but morality without power becomes irrelevance. You must embody both. So let's ask, what if the answer isn't to reject power, but to redefine it? Instead of seeing power as control over others, what if we saw it as control over ourselves? The ability to remain calm in chaos, to think clearly when provoked, to act decisively with integrity. That's the kind of power that lasts. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, ruled not by crushing others, but by mastering his own mind. He believed that true power came from within, not from fear but from discipline. That's not weakness, that's strength with roots. And it's the antidote to both blind obedience and reckless ambition. So why do ruthless people often rise to power? Because they understand how the system works. They don't hesitate, they don't wait, they act. But that doesn't mean we should become them. It means we must become wiser than them. The world may not reward kindness by default, but that doesn't mean kindness has no place in power. It means we must bring strength to our morality, and morality to our strength. Because in the end, history doesn't just remember the ones who rose the fastest. It remembers the ones who built something that lasted. And those people, they weren't just powerful, they were awake. Let's dig deeper into the psychological dynamics. What gives ruthless people their edge? Beyond strategy, it's something called psychological immunity, the ability to detach from guilt, shame, and even empathy, when those emotions become inconvenient. Now, to someone with a strong moral compass, that sounds horrifying, but from a purely survivalist lens, this detachment can become a shield, an armor. This doesn't mean these individuals are inherently evil. Some are, but others are simply emotionally compartmentalized. They've learned to separate who they are from what they must do. They don't dwell, they move on, they execute. And ironically, this kind of emotional detachment often mimics stoicism, but without the depth. Whereas the Stoic seeks mastery over emotion in service of virtue, the ruthless mind seeks detachment in service of gain. It's a subtle difference, but it's everything. One is built on inner peace, the other on external conquest. Hannah Arendt, in her famous work on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, coined the term the banality of evil. Eichmann wasn't a monster in appearance, he wasn't foaming at the mouth with rage, he was ordinary, a bureaucrat, a man who followed orders, a man who never stopped to question the machine he served. This is what makes the rise of the ruthless so chilling. They often don't look like villains, they look like managers, politicians, influencers. They smile, they speak well, and behind the scenes they manipulate. Just enough to get ahead, just enough to stay above the chaos they quietly fuel. They're not cartoonish devils, they're calculated pragmatists, and the systems they thrive in, often designed to reward efficiency over ethics. This is why philosophy matters. It teaches us to see, not just to act. So what can we do? The first step isn't rebellion, it's recognition. You must recognize when you're being played, when someone is using charm as camouflage, when their kindness is a strategy, when their vision is a thirst for domination. Most people are not deceived by complexity, they're deceived by simplicity. The simple smile, the simple answer, the illusion of certainty in a world that's anything but. True resistance begins with uncomfortable honesty. Not everyone who rises deserves to. Not every authority is legitimate. Not every successful person is admirable. And not every quiet soul is weak. To navigate this world without becoming cold or complicit, we need something rare: ethical resilience. Ethical resilience is the strength to remain principled without being naive. It's what allowed Viktor Frankl to maintain dignity in a concentration camp, what allowed Nelson Mandela to emerge from prison with clarity, not vengeance, what allowed countless thinkers and writers and artists to speak truth in the face of overwhelming pressure to conform. It means you learn to survive the game without selling your soul to it. You don't become the enemy, you become indigestible to the system that feeds on compromise, and that kind of power, the power to hold the line, lasts longer than any political victory. At this point we must ask, what is philosophy for? Is it just an intellectual exercise, or is it something deeper? Philosophy, at its best, is a mirror, a sword, a compass. It forces you to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What do I believe when belief is costly? What will I refuse, no matter how much I'm offered? In a world that rewards convenience and applause, philosophy is a kind of rebellion. It reminds you that integrity isn't about public image, it's about alignment between thought, action, and being. And in this way it becomes not just a discipline but a form of armor, not to shield you from pain but to clarify your path through it. If you measure success by wealth, status, or dominance, you will always be at war with yourself. But what if we defined success differently? Success as internal coherence, as keeping your soul intact, as knowing that even if you lost a race you never lost your dignity. Success as the ability to look back without shame. This doesn't mean you live passively, it means you live deliberately. You become what the ancient Greeks called sophrosyne, a person of balance, wisdom, and self-restraint. Someone who doesn't just respond to the world but shapes it through presence. There is a kind of quiet strength in the world. It doesn't broadcast itself. It doesn't crave the spotlight, but it endues. You see it in the teacher who shapes generations without ever being known, in the elder who speaks only when it matters, in the person who refuses to betray their values, no matter how much it costs them. These people are not powerless, they are underrated. And while the ruthless may rise fast, the quiet strong create something deeper, legacy, because they know that what you build with integrity may be slower, but it's unshakable. So we return to our opening question. Why do ruthless people rise to power? Because the system allows it, because many look the other way, because the honest are often too silent. But that doesn't mean we're doomed. It means we're called to think deeper, act wiser, and live with a kind of strength that doesn't rot from the inside. So the final question isn't, how do we stop the ruthless? It's how do we become so grounded, so clear, and so awake, that we become immune to their influence, and powerful in a different way? That answer starts with you. Let's address something uncomfortable. Why don't more good people speak up? The answer isn't cowardice, it's often exhaustion. Good people feel the weight of the world. They overthink, they doubt themselves, they ask, what if I'm wrong? Meanwhile, the ruthless don't hesitate. They act, they speak, they move forward without asking permission. This dynamic creates a tragic imbalance, the thoughtful retreat, while the shameless rise. In his work The Sociopath Next Door, psychologist Martha Stout wrote that roughly 1 in 25 people has no conscience, no remorse, no empathy, and yet, they can fake charm, connection, even concern perfectly. Now imagine those people in a room full of people pleasers. They dominate not through brilliance, but through audacity. And the silent good, they tell themselves, it's not my place, but it is. There's a story about a bamboo seed. When planted, it doesn't grow for the first 5 years, not visibly, at least. But during that time it's developing an underground root system preparing for a rapid surge. When it finally sprouts, it can grow 90 feet in just 6 weeks. That's character. That's inner strength. It doesn't always show immediately, but when it does, it's unstoppable. The ruthless often burn fast and bright, but character endures, because real power isn't just about what you can take, it's about what you can withstand. The lies, the manipulation, the pressure to become someone else. Character is the quiet refusal to betray yourself, even when no one would notice if you did. There's a trap many fall into when confronting power. The idea that you have to become cruel to defeat cruelty, cold to resist manipulation, ruthless to challenge the ruthless. But that's a myth, a dangerous one, because if you become them, you've already lost. The goal isn't to mirror their strategy, it's to make their strategy irrelevant, like a virus trying to infect a system that's already immune. That immunity doesn't come from fighting fire with fire, it comes from knowing who you are, so deeply, so clearly that their games lose their grip. You become unmarketable to their manipulation, unshaken by their rewards, unmoved by their punishments. That is true power. Here's the hardest part. You will lose things by staying clean: opportunities, influence, friends, followers. The world often punishes integrity, at least in the short term. But long term, the one with clean hands sleeps better, breathes easier, doesn't flinch when they look in the mirror. There's an ancient saying, "He who conquers himself is greater than he who conquers 1,000 enemies in battle." You may not rise as fast, you may not be crowned by the crowd, but you will carry something far more valuable: peace. And peace isn't passive, it's the result of hard choices, painful ones, repeated every day. But eventually peace becomes your edge. In a world obsessed with visibility, there is deep power in obscurity, not hiding, but choosing not to perform. Some of the wisest people alive aren't on stages, they're not trending, they're quietly shaping lives, nurturing their communities, refining their souls in silence. They are invisible, but not irrelevant. This is a kind of anti-power, a refusal to chase status, a commitment to impact over image. The ruthless crave attention, but the wise, they crave authenticity. Their legacy won't be carved into monuments, it will live in the hearts they've touched, the lives they've shaped, the ripple of truth they set into motion. That kind of influence doesn't fade. Now imagine something radical. What if more people woke up, not in the political sense, but in the philosophical one? What if more of us learned to see the masks, the manipulation, the illusion? What if more of us refused to sell ourselves for short-term wins, refused to applaud those who rise through deceit? We wouldn't need a revolution, we'd simply stop feeding the machine, and it would collapse, not with violence, but with indifference, because power isn't taken, it's given. And the moment we stop giving it to the ruthless, their throne vanishes. The world doesn't change when the powerful fall, it changes when the awake refuse to kneel. Maybe you felt helpless, watching the news, reading headlines, seeing narcissists win, but you're not powerless. You hold the one thing the ruthless fear: clarity. Clarity cuts through manipulation, it sees the truth behind the smile, it makes you unpredictable, uncontrollable, free. And from that freedom, a new kind of power is born. Not the power to rule others, but the power to govern yourself, to choose your response, your values, your direction. And in a world of noise, that kind of clarity is revolutionary. So here's the truth. Yes, ruthless people often rise, but they fall too. What remains, what endures, is not domination, but dignity, and the rarest kind of strength. It's not force, not manipulation, it's the ability to remain whole in a world that demands you shatter. So protect your depth, guard your empathy, honor your path, because you don't need to outplay the ruthless, you just need to outlast them, and trust that in the end it's the honest, the clear, and the awake who write the story that matters. To live with a conscience is to feel too much. You notice what others ignore, the small cruelties, the subtle betrayals, the moments when silence is complicity. And that noticing, it costs you sleep, relationships, sometimes your career. The world doesn't always reward the conscience bearer. In fact, it often punishes them, because a clear conscience is threatening. It reveals the compromises others are trying to hide. It makes them uncomfortable, simply by existing. But here's what the ruthless will never understand. The pain of conscience is still better than the emptiness of corruption. The person who feels too much still has their soul. The one who feels nothing has lost it. We like to think that systems are fair, that effort is rewarded, that kindness is reciprocated, that justice, while slow, eventually arrives. But many systems aren't built to reward virtue.
They reward compliance, they reward charisma over character, volume over wisdom, obedience over insight, and so, good people find themselves penalized for traits that make them human: honesty, vulnerability, reflection. This is how systems select for shadows. The ones who rise are those who can play the part, hide their humanity, perform power. But that doesn't mean you should shrink. It means you should stop seeking validation from systems that were never built for souls like yours. Power leaves a shadow, not just over people, but over entire cultures. When ruthless individuals dominate institutions, governments, corporations, even families, they shape the values of the people under them. Their methods become normalized, their behavior becomes admired, their success becomes aspirational. This is how toxicity multiplies, not by force but by mimicry. We don't need more warnings, we need more mirrors, because when we emulate the cruel to protect ourselves, we extend their reach. But when we resist, silently, persistently, courageously, we begin to reverse the shadow. We become a different kind of model, one rooted in dignity, not domination. There's a strange kind of arithmetic in modern life. The bad is loud, the good is quiet. Headlines scream betrayal, greed, corruption. But the kindness of a teacher who listens, the bravery of a worker who speaks out, the love of a friend who stays during your worst moment, those don't go viral, they go unnoticed. But they are no less real. In fact, they are the fabric of sanity, the hidden scaffolding that keeps the world from collapse. Never mistake silence for absence. The invisible good is everywhere, it just doesn't advertise itself. There's a cost to seeing clearly. Once you recognize the games people play, the lies institutions tell, the hollowness behind many performances, you can't go back, you can't unsee it. This is the burden of awareness. You feel alone, disillusioned, maybe even cynical. But that disillusionment isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because disillusionment is not the loss of hope, it's the loss of illusions, and illusions were never safe to begin with. So grieve them, mourn the world you thought existed, then begin again, with clearer eyes, and this time build something real. The ruthless rise quickly, because they skip the steps. They don't build, they conquer. They don't connect, they manipulate. They don't lead, they dominate. But what's built fast, often falls fast. The good, they move slowly, deliberately, not because they're weak, but because they're rooted, like the bamboo, like the oak, like anything meant to last. In a world addicted to speed, slowness is a form of rebellion, patience is power, stillness is strategy. The wise don't chase the storm, they become the mountain. Legacy isn't built by those who obsess over being remembered, it's built by those who focus on being real. The ruthless want statues, the wise want impact. Legacy is not about your name being carved into stone, it's about the way your presence lingers in people's lives. Did you leave them better? Did you open their minds? Did you protect something sacred, truth, love, beauty, when others sold it? If so, then you've left a trace, not a monument, a movement, and that will outlive you in the only way that matters. There is a kind of courage that's quiet. It doesn't shout, doesn't posture, doesn't wear armor. It just shows up, again and again, soft but immovable, open but unshaken. This is the gentle audacity of the soul, the courage to stay kind when the world goes cold, to tell the truth when lies are easier, to be vulnerable when guardedness is the norm. It's not weakness, it's not fragility, it's defiance in its most beautiful form. So we return to the question, why do the worst people often rise? Because we've created systems that reward the shallow over the deep. Because we've confused confidence with wisdom. Because we've been taught to respect power more than integrity. But that doesn't have to stay true. You are part of this world, which means you help shape it, not by becoming louder than the ruthless, but by becoming clearer than the noise. The more awake you become, the less power they have. So stay awake, stay gentle, and remember, you are not here to imitate the ruthless. You are here to outlast them, to outlove them, to outlive their legacy of fear, and that is the real revolution.